Jack stood at rigid attention, sweat crawling down his spine beneath his stiff cadet uniform. Around him, the training yard buzzed with activity, shouts, the crack of pulse rifles, the occasional clang of metal against metal. But all of it faded into a dull thrum as his eyes locked onto the towering figure before him. Commander Tarek loomed, a galactic soldier bred for war, his armor gleaming obsidian under the twin suns. His eyes, pale and unblinking, swept across the assembled cadets with the cold precision of a machine. "You're soft," Tarek sneered, voice amplified through his helmet's modulator. "Every last one of you." Jax clenched his jaw, feeling Gareth tense beside him. Kira stood on Jax's other side, her face impassive, though he caught the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Mara, 2 rows back, gripped her rifle hard enough to pale her knuckles. Tarek stalked forward, boot heels striking the ground with deliberate menace. "We pluck you from your little colonies, your dirt farms, your comfort zones, and you think wearing a uniform makes you warriors. But war," his voice dropped lethal soft, "war unmakes you. And most of you, you'll break." He stopped in front of Jax, studying him with a gaze that seemed to strip away skin and bone. Jax didn't flinch. "Name?" Tarek demanded. "Jax Carter, sir." Tarek's gauntlet shot out, striking Jax across the face with bone-jarring force. Gasps rippled through the cadets as Jax staggered, stars bursting behind his eyes. Blood welled in his mouth, coppery and warm, but he didn't fall. Slowly, deliberately, he straightened, eyes blazing. Tarek tilted his head, the faintest trace of amusement flickering in his expression. "Good. You'll need that fire when they're pulling your limbs from the mud." Jax's fists curled at his sides, nails digging into his palms. For a heartbeat, the air around him seemed to shift, thicken, hum, as though charged with something vast and restless. Tarek's gaze lingered a fraction longer, sharp and calculating, before he turned away. "Back to work," the commander barked, striding down the line. The cadets exhaled as one, tension bleeding out in muttered curses and ragged breaths. Gareth leaned in, voice low. "Don't let him bait you, Jax." "I'm fine," Jax muttered, though the ache in his jaw said otherwise. "Sure," Gareth snorted. "You looked real fine eating his gauntlet." Kira's sharp glance silenced them. "Eyes up. He's not done." Hours passed in a blur of drills, simulations, and shouted orders. Jax moved on instinct, his body running on muscle memory while his mind churned. The slap had awakened something. Not anger, not exactly, but a coiling heat that hadn't cooled. It pulsed at the edges of his awareness, whispering in a voice he couldn't quite understand. As dusk bled across the sky, the cadets stumbled toward their quarters, too exhausted to speak. Jax lingered at the edge of the training yard, watching the stars flicker to life overhead. He felt Gareth's hand clap his shoulder. "Don't brood too long," Gareth said quietly. "Tomorrow's another beating." Jax offered a faint smile. "Thanks for the pep talk." When Gareth left, Jax closed his eyes, listening. Beneath the usual camp sounds, the generator's hum, the chatter of soldiers, the rhythmic thud of distant artillery tests, there was something else. A hum beneath the earth, faint but insistent, almost like anticipation. He turned sharply as Mara approached, her face pale in the starlight. "Whatever you're planning," she said softly, "don't." Jax frowned. "I'm not planning anything." She gave a crooked smile. "You wear your thoughts like a badge, Jax. Just," her voice faltered, the smile slipping. "Don't give him a reason." Jax studied her, noting the weariness in her eyes, the quiet dread she tried so hard to hide. His chest tightened, but the words tangled on his tongue. Before he could speak, a sudden roar split the night. The ground trembled. Lights flared along the outer perimeter. Sirens wailed, sharp and shrill. Mara spun, eyes wide. "That's not a drill." Jax was already moving. Chaos exploded across the base as dropships screamed overhead, sleek and black against the night. Soldiers poured from the barracks, weapons raised, voices crackling through comms. The cadets scrambled to their stations, half-dressed, half-armed, adrenaline crashing through exhaustion like a tidal wave. Jax pushed through the surge, heart pounding. Gareth fell in beside him, rifle in hand, Kira right behind. Mara stumbled briefly, but caught herself, jaw set. A figure cut through the chaos. Tarek, moving with predatory calm, his voice slicing through the noise. Cadets, form up. Hold the line. But even as the words left his mouth, the enemy was on them. The first blast hit the southern barricade, a searing arc of light that turned steel to molten slag. Jax barely registered the heat before a second detonation rocked the ground, hurling bodies and debris into the air. He coughed, ears ringing, as shapes surged from the smoke, armored, monstrous, moving with terrifying speed. Jax's world narrowed to the thud of his heartbeat, the rasp of his breath, the press of Kira's shoulder against his, Gareth's curses, Mara's cry, and above it all, Tarek's orders, sharp and relentless. Hold the line. Jax raised his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. Then something inside him broke. Or maybe it woke. The air warped, twisted. Time seemed to lurch, each heartbeat stretched, each breath drawn out to a shuddering eternity. Around him, sound dulled, motion blurred. The thing inside, the heat, the whispering pulse, surged, unfurling through muscle and bone, until Jax felt himself moving, faster than thought, faster than fear. The first attacker never saw him coming. Jax hit like a storm unleashed, tearing through armor, ripping weapons from grasping hands, hurling bodies aside with impossible force. Somewhere, dimly, he heard shouting, his name, maybe, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was the surge, the fire, the fierce, clear certainty that he could stop this. That he had to. When the smoke cleared, when the last shot echoed into silence, Jax stood at the heart of the wreckage, chest heaving, hands trembling. Tarek approached slowly, helmet tucked under one arm, eyes sharp with something between fury and fascination. "What are you?" the commander murmured. Jax met his gaze. "I don't know," he said softly. Behind him, the cadets rose from cover, their faces stricken, awed, afraid. The night stretched wide and dark around them, heavy with the promise of what was still to come. The wind howled through the ruins of the training grounds, lifting ash and debris in swirling eddies around Jax's feet. Smoke curled from shattered towers, and the sharp tang of ozone hung in the air where weapons had fired only minutes before. Jax stood motionless, his fists trembling at his sides, staring at the fallen body of Commander Skrull. The massive alien's armored chest rose and fell shallowly, the punctured plates hissing with each strained breath. Around him, the cadets shifted in uncertain silence. Mara approached first, her pale face streaked with soot, her wide eyes darting between Jax and the sprawled soldiers. "What did you do?" she whispered, voice thin, cracked with disbelief. Jax exhaled slowly, his chest tight. "I don't know," he murmured. But deep down, a part of him did. It was the part that had always known, waiting for its moment to wake. From the shadows, Gareth emerged, one of the older cadets, his jaw clenched and eyes sharp with calculation. "You just picked a fight we can't win," Gareth muttered, crossing his arms. "They'll send more. You've doomed us all." Jax met his gaze, unflinching. "Then we fight." A ripple of unease passed through the group. These were children, half-starved, undertrained, and broken down by months of cruelty. But in that moment, something flickered in their faces, something Jax had never seen before, a glimmer of possibility, of defiance. "We need a plan," Mara said quickly, her voice steadier now. "We can't stay here." The reinforcements will come, and when they do, they'll wipe us out, Gareth finished coldly. Jax turned, sweeping his gaze over the remains of the camp. He saw what they all saw: the shattered walls, the twisted gates, the bodies of alien guards. But he also saw the terrain beyond: jagged canyons, shadowed valleys, and caves threading through the mountains. If they moved fast, they could vanish into that labyrinth before the next wave descended. "We run," Jax said, "but not blind. We need supplies, weapons, maps." A low voice sounded from behind them. "The armory." They turned to see Kira, a wiry girl with a shaved head and scars crisscrossing her arms. She had always kept to the edges, silent, watchful. Now she stepped forward, her eyes sharp. "I know the codes. I was a runner for the quartermaster. We can get in." Jax nodded once. "Show us." The cadets moved quickly, slipping through the ruins with the urgency of hunted things. The armory door loomed ahead, heavy and reinforced, but Kira was already at the panel, fingers dancing across the controls. The lock hissed open, and they surged inside. Rows of pulse rifles lined the walls, alongside crates of rations and medical supplies. For a heartbeat, they all froze, wide-eyed at the sight of real power within their reach. Jax's hands hovered over a rifle before pulling back. He could feel the crackle of energy in his blood, and a weapon felt redundant, even unnecessary. "Take what you can carry," he ordered. "Nothing more." Mara stuffed packs with ration bars, canteens, and bandages. Gareth and 2 others distributed weapons, checking charges and snapping clips into place. Jax moved among them, silent, focused, as the heat inside him pulsed and surged, restless now, eager. When they emerged from the armory, the first drops of rain began to fall, hissing softly as they struck the smoldering earth. Jax lifted his face to the sky, the cold water cutting through the grime on his skin, clearing his mind. Kira slipped to his side. "There's a service tunnel that leads to the outer cliffs," she murmured. "We can be in the canyons within the hour." Jax nodded, gesturing for the others to follow. As they moved, he felt eyes on him, the cadets watching, weighing, hoping. It was a weight he hadn't asked for, but could no longer refuse. They reached the tunnel mouth just as the deep, resonant hum of approaching dropships split the sky. Jax turned, watching the sleek shapes streak toward the camp, their engines glowing like falling stars. He could see the gleam of armor, the shimmer of energy shields. Reinforcements, just as Gareth had warned. Mara tugged at his sleeve, urgency flaring in her eyes. "Jax, we have to go." For a moment, Jax lingered. He stared at the wreckage of the only world he had known, at the fallen commanders, the burned banners, the scorched ground. Something inside him shifted, hardening into steel. "I'm ready," he said softly. They slipped into the tunnel, the dark swallowing them as the thunder of ships shook the earth behind them. Inside the narrow passage, the cadets moved in tense silence. Only the scrape of boots on stone and the soft drip of water marked their passage. Jax led the way, his senses stretched taut, feeling the air change, the faintest currents of movement ahead, the rhythm of footsteps behind. It was as though the world itself was slowing for him, each moment elongated, every detail sharp-edged. As they reached the far end of the tunnel, the earth trembled again, not from ships this time, but from something heavier, more deliberate. Jax froze, holding up a hand. The others halted behind him, breaths held. From the shadows, a shape emerged. Not a galactic soldier, but something worse. A mech, 2 stories tall, its armored frame gleaming, weapons systems humming to life. It blocked the exit, its sensors flickering as it scanned the passage. Panic surged through the cadets, but Jax felt only a strange calm. His heart slowed, the heat inside him surged, burning away the last tethers of hesitation. His hands clenched at his sides, fingers twitching with energy. "Back," Gareth hissed. "We have to fall back." "No," Jax murmured. He stepped forward. Mara caught his arm. "Jax, you can't." But he was already moving, the world narrowing to a single, searing point. The mech's weapons pivoted, locking on. Jax felt the pulse of its targeting systems, the split-second calculation before it would fire. And then he ran. The air cracked as Jax surged forward, a blur of motion, his body propelled by something beyond muscle, beyond will. The mech's cannons roared, but he was already there, vaulting onto its armored leg, fingers finding seams and grips as though he had done this 100 times before. The cadets shouted, voices echoing through the tunnel, but Jax didn't hear them. His world was the thrum of the machine, the sharp tang of ozone, the scream of metal under his grip. With a twist and a wrench, he drove his fist into the mech's core. There was a flash of light, a thunderclap of sound, and the mech convulsed, its systems flickering and dying as it crashed to the ground. Jax stood over the wreckage, chest heaving, skin glowing faintly with residual energy. Slowly, he turned, meeting the wide, disbelieving eyes of his fellow cadets. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mara's voice broke the silence, trembling but fierce. "We follow you." Jax drew a shaky breath, nodded once, and turned toward the rising dawn. The mountains waited, the war waiting with them. The mountains swallowed them whole, the canyons winding like the veins of some ancient, sleeping beast. Jax led the way, his strides unbroken despite the jagged terrain beneath his boots. Behind him, the cadets scrambled, breathless, their boots slipping on loose gravel, eyes flicking nervously to the skies. The hum of distant ships haunted them like a ghost, always just beyond the next ridge, promising death if they faltered. Mara stumbled, catching herself against a sharp outcrop. "We can't keep this pace," she gasped, her voice tight with exhaustion. Jax halted, turning to face the group. His eyes swept over them, faces streaked with dirt and sweat, shoulders sagging under the weight of packs and weapons. Kira leaned against the rock, chest heaving, while Gareth's jaw was set, eyes burning with a mix of anger and stubborn pride. They were children dressed in borrowed fury, and yet something stronger sparked in them now. "We're close," Jax said quietly. "There's a pass ahead. We hold there." Gareth let out a bitter laugh. "Hold, against what's coming." Jax met his gaze, and something in his calm sent a shiver through the group. Whatever they send. They moved again, the narrow trail cutting through the canyon's heart until it opened into a jagged cleft between two towering spires. Beyond, the land fell away into a labyrinth of stone and shadow, a natural fortress that only the desperate would dare cross. Jax stopped at the threshold, running his fingers along the cold rock. He could feel a humming faintly under his skin, as though the earth itself recognized the storm brewing inside him. "We make our stand here," he murmured. The cadets sprang into action without needing more. Kira rigged motion sensors at the narrow approaches, their faint green lights blinking to life. Mara helped set up a rough barricade with broken slabs of stone, her hands shaking but determined. Gareth checked weapons, his motions sharp, mechanical, as though trying to drown his doubts in precision. Night fell in a swift, bruised sweep across the sky. The stars blinked coldly overhead, indifferent witnesses to the unfolding rebellion. Jax sat apart from the others, his back against the stone, eyes closed, feeling the thrum of his own blood. His hands still ached from the mech, the memory of metal buckling under his grip pulsing through his muscles like a half-forgotten dream. Mara settled beside him quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You scare them," she said softly. Jax opened his eyes, the faintest smile touching his lips. I scare myself. She looked down at her hands, tracing the faint scars along her knuckles. What happened to you, Jax? He turned his gaze to the stars. I don't know, but it's always been there, waiting. The slap just woke it up. Footsteps crunched softly nearby. Gareth crouched on Jax's other side, his usual edge muted. Scouts reported movement. 2 dropships, maybe 3 clicks out. Heavy infantry. Jax nodded slowly, rising to his feet. Then it's time. They gathered in the center of the pass, a loose circle of young faces lit by the cold gleam of starlight. Jax looked at each of them in turn. Kira, sharp and silent. Mara, fierce despite the tremble in her hands. Gareth, hard as flint, masking his fear with anger. Around them, the others stood, ragged and thin, but unbroken. They think we're just children, Jax said quietly, his voice carrying across the still night. They think they can crush us like insects. A low murmur ran through the group. They're wrong. The ground shuddered, faint at first, then stronger, as the dropships descended. The cadets tightened their grip on weapons, eyes wide, hearts hammering. Jack stepped forward, his breath steady despite the rising tension. He could feel the storm inside him now, coiled like a serpent at the base of his spine, whispering promises of destruction, of power unbound. The first ship crested the ridge, sleek and black against the stars, its engines snarling as it hovered above the pass. Floodlights ignited, drenching the canyon in blinding white. From the open hatches, armored soldiers dropped, landing with a coordinated thud that shook the ground. Gareth raised his rifle, teeth bared. Ready. But Jax lifted a hand, stilling him. The lead soldier advanced, his voice booming through an amplifier. Surrender now, and you'll be spared. Jax took a step forward, bare hands at his sides. He felt the eyes of his comrades on his back, felt the thin line between faith and despair stretched taut. He didn't flinch when the soldier raised his weapon. He didn't speak when the command was given. He moved. The air cracked. An instant of silence split by an eruption of force. Jax surged forward, faster than the eye could follow, the ground splitting under his feet as he drove into the heart of the enemy line. Metal screamed as armored bodies were hurled aside like rag dolls. Pulse rifles spat fire, but the shots never reached him. They twisted, warped, as if the air itself bent to his will. Behind him, the cadets charged, voices raw with defiance. Kira danced through the chaos, blades flashing. Garrett's rifle barked in tight, controlled bursts. Mara's voice rang out, rallying the others, pulling them into a storm they no longer feared. Jax was the center of it all, the eye of the tempest, every strike precise, every motion devastating. The soldiers faltered, their formation unraveling as panic rippled through their ranks. They had come expecting a rout. Instead, they met a force they could neither match nor understand. And then, silence. Jack stood in the rubble, chest heaving, the last soldier at his feet. The dropship engine screamed in retreat, lifting off in panicked flight. Dust settled slowly, the echoes of battle fading into the night. He turned, meeting the stunned gazes of his comrades. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mara stepped forward, eyes shining with something fierce, something bright. She reached out, resting a trembling hand on his arm. "We hold," she whispered. Jax drew a shaky breath, the heat inside him flickering, banking like a fire waiting for its next breath of wind. He looked to the horizon, where the night still stretched wide and dark. "It's only the beginning," he said softly. Behind him, the cadets stood taller, shoulders squared, eyes lifted to the unknown. And in the quiet, the promise of war hung heavy, waiting. The morning broke cold and gray, mist coiling through the shattered canyon like the last breath of something dying. The cadets moved silently among the ruins, gathering supplies, tending wounds, their faces pale but set with determination. Jack stood alone at the edge of the pass, gazing across the desolate expanse where the enemy had fled hours before. His hands flexed at his sides, fingers twitching faintly as though still remembering the violence they had unleashed. Mara approached quietly, wrapping a tattered scarf tighter around her neck. "They'll be back," she said, her voice rough from smoke and exhaustion. Jax didn't look at her, but his mouth tightened. "I know." Gareth came up behind them, a bandage cutting across his forehead, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "Scouts say they're regrouping at the valley mouth. 10 times the force they sent last night." For a moment, none of them spoke. The wind shifted, stirring ash and the sharp, metallic scent of wreckage. Then Jax exhaled, a slow, measured breath. "Good." Mara shot him a sidelong glance. "You have a plan?" He turned then, eyes dark and clear. "We hit them first." A flicker of alarm crossed Garrett's face. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and running on scraps. You want to charge a battalion?" Jax's gaze swept over the camp. Kira crouched near a shattered console, fingers deftly rewiring a salvaged explosive. 2 younger cadets worked to repair a battered drone, faces pinched in concentration. Despite their exhaustion, despite the odds, they had not broken. "They expect us to hide," Jack said softly. "We show them we don't." There was a beat of silence. Then Mara let out a shaky laugh. "You're insane." "Maybe." Jax's mouth curved in the faintest ghost of a smile. "But they'll remember us." Preparations moved swiftly. Kira handed out what explosive she'd salvaged. Gareth mapped the narrowest approach through the canyon, a twisting route the enemy would least expect. Mara organized the cadets into teams, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath. As the sun clawed its way higher, a tense energy crackled through the camp, the kind that came when there was no turning back. Jax pulled Gareth aside as the others worked. "I need to lead the left flank. Draw their attention, pull their line." Gareth's brow furrowed. "And you?" "I'll break their center." Gareth studied him for a long moment, then gave a tight nod. "Don't die." Jax clasped his shoulder briefly. "You too." When the sun reached its zenith, they moved. The canyon seemed to hold its breath as the cadets slipped through its jagged arteries, shadows darting over stone. Above, the enemy gathered, a vast machine of war assembled with precision. Dropships, walkers, soldiers in gleaming armor. Orders crackled through comms, and engines rumbled to life. But for all their power, they were blind to the force slipping toward them. The first blast came from Kira's team, a brilliant arc of flame that split a supply line in 2. Shouts erupted, soldiers scattering, scrambling to respond. Garrett's unit surged forward, a blur of motion and gunfire, striking fast and then fading into the rocks. At the heart of it all, Jax moved like a storm unchained. The first squad to intercept him never saw the blow coming. Armor crumpled under his fists as though made of paper, weapons twisted from hands, men flung aside like debris in a hurricane. The line buckled, a ripple of panic spreading outward as word of the lone attacker surged through enemy ranks. But Jax barely registered the chaos. Inside him, the heat built, the strange, coiling power that had become both his weapon and his curse. His heart pounded with it, his muscles sang with it, his mind walked the thin edge between control and surrender. For a moment, he caught sight of himself reflected in a shattered visor, a smear of blood, dirt, and feral light, and wondered if he was even human anymore. A sudden sharp cry pulled his focus. Mara's team had breached the perimeter, but they were pinned, caught between advancing soldiers and the sheer drop of the canyon edge. Without hesitation, Jax crossed the distance, a streak of fury and bone-deep resolve. He tore through the enemy ranks, scattering them like leaves, reaching Mara just as the cliffside trembled under the force of a stray blast. "Move!" he roared. and she didn't argue. Together, they drove the enemy back, step by brutal step, until the cadets were clear and the cliffside crumbled in a roar of stone and dust, cutting off pursuit. For a breathless instant, silence reigned. Then a ragged cheer rose from the cadets, fierce and defiant, carrying over the chaos like a banner. But Jax knew it wasn't over. He turned toward the heart of the battlefield where the enemy commander stood flanked by armored guards, barking orders into a headset. Their eyes met across the churn of war. The man who had slapped a child, the boy who had become something the galaxy would learn to fear. Without a word, Jax moved. He crossed the ground in a heartbeat, tearing through the last defenses, the storm within him unleashed in a surge of impossible speed and strength. The commander raised his weapon, eyes wide, but Jax struck first, sending him sprawling across the dirt, armor cracked, helmet rolling free. For a long moment, the battlefield froze. Then Jax spoke, voice low but carrying. "You slapped the wrong child." The enemy line faltered. Ships lifted in hurried retreat, soldiers broke ranks, and the cadets surged forward, driving them from the valley. By the time the last dropship vanished beyond the horizon, the ground was littered with the wreckage of a shattered force. Jack stood among his comrades, chest heaving, gaze distant. Around him, the cadets cheered, hugged, wept, their disbelief giving way to joy, then to something deeper, a fierce, stubborn hope. Mara touched his arm lightly. "You did it." He shook his head slowly. "We did." Gareth clapped him on the shoulder. Kira offered a rare, crooked grin, and the younger cadets gathered close, their faces alight. In their eyes, Jack saw not the frightened recruits they had been, but the warriors they had become. Above them, the sky stretched vast and waiting. Jax lifted his gaze to it, feeling the quiet pulse of the storm still coiled inside him. This was not the end. It was the beginning.